Now let's turn to India and the US. Trump's trade war has already strained ties, and while negotiations drag on, a new flashpoint may be opening up. Fentanyl. It's a lab-made drug. It is stronger than heroin, and it has fueled America's deadly drug crisis, the fentanyl crisis. So far, Trump has blamed China for it, but now it turns out that his team tried to drag in India too. A new report has revealed this. It talks about the early days of the trade war. This was just before Trump announced the tariffs. His officials held discussions on the fentanyl crisis. And in focus was an assessment published by US intelligence agencies. It was a report on fentanyl trafficking, specifically on the chemicals used to make the drug and how those chemicals ended up in the US. That's what the report contained. This report was published in March, and it named India. The report said India was the number 2 supplier of such chemicals used to make fentanyl. India was the number 2 supplier, China was the top supplier, and India was named right after it. And US drug control experts briefed Donald Trump's officials about this. So what was the goal of this briefing? The idea was to build an argument against India, to see whether this report on fentanyl could be used to justify higher tariffs on India. In other words, they were exploring if they could blame India for America's drug crisis and use it as an excuse to slap tariffs. As it turned out, they decided against it. US officials have not named India publicly for the fentanyl crisis. Instead, they picked another issue. They focused on India's purchases of Russian oil. That became their excuse for the tariffs. And those tariffs are still in place, by the way. A 50% duty on Indian exports. It still applies. India and the US are negotiating a truce, and this fentanyl crisis could become a headache for India again, which is why New Delhi is actively addressing the issue. Indian agencies are stepping up enforcement. They're working with American agencies. In fact, back in the month of March, India made major arrests. The anti-terrorism squad in Gujarat carried out an operation. They nabbed 2 individuals who were said to be smuggling banned chemicals. These were ingredients used to make fentanyl. These 2 men were smuggling these ingredients. India arrested them, and the Americans helped. I'll tell you how. The banned chemicals were being smuggled into South American nations. US authorities intercepted some shipments, including 4 consignments that were on their way to Mexico. The Americans seized them. This was in March. Then in September, the US Embassy in Delhi issued a statement. It said, and I'm quoting, "We are grateful to our counterparts in the government of India for their close cooperation to combat this shared challenge." Now, this was in connection with a different case. The US had denied visas to some business executives. That's because it believed that these people were involved in trafficking fentanyl chemicals. So what do these episodes tell you? That India is working with American agencies to track, curb, and investigate the fentanyl problem. FBI Director Kash Patel agrees. Consider what he said in the month of June. I'm quoting, "FBI agents were in India working with local officials to find these companies involved in the fentanyl trade, and we are going to shut them down." And this cooperation is not limited to the US. This weekend, Prime Minister Modi was at the G20 summit. South Africa was the host. And in front of all G20 members, Prime Minister Modi called for a joint initiative to fight synthetic drugs like fentanyl. He tried to rally global leaders. He called for a global crackdown on drugs. And that shows that India is making a case for active enforcement. And the effort needs a bigger role of world powers, because this threat is fast evolving. Of course, India too has a major role to play. It is, after all, called the pharmacy of the world. India is called the pharmacy of the world. This industry, the pharma industry, is expected to grow to $130 billion by 2030. It supplies about 20% of the world's generic drugs. And this makes India the largest provider of generics globally. The US is among the largest buyers of Indian drugs. In fact, after the pandemic, the US has been buying more. India's pharmaceutical exports to the United States have surged. They've gone up by 70%, 70%. Today, 16% of America's finished retail drugs come from India, and that makes India one of the biggest medical suppliers to the United States. So yes, India has a big role to play here. It must invest more in regulation. It must strengthen oversight of its pharma sector. But like I said, this threat is evolving. Traffickers are getting smarter. They keep exploiting new loopholes. They keep using new routes, and they often send chemicals through other countries just to avoid detection. Which means the solution to this problem cannot be local. It needs global coordination. India has tried to lead that conversation. It has pushed for action at the G20 summit. Too bad Donald Trump was not there to hear it.
I wore the crown of a revolutionary. I promised to lift my nation. I claimed to fight imperialism. I became the very thing I warned against. I funded militias across continents. I feared my own shadow. Some called me the King of Kings. History calls me something else. The dictator. Who am I?